Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl, and here we are looking at the Bretonnian faction focus. This is the last episode in the series as we take a look at those legendary lords. So what are we doing as part of this series? For those that haven't seen the other videos, we're looking at the last edition, which was a 6th edition Bretonnian Army Book for Warhammer Fantasy Battle. We're looking at what was in the roster, how those units played, and then how they might play in Warhammer The Old World, and with the recent reveals also see what units still haven't been talked about, where the gaps are, and what we might see in the future. But now we're moving on to Legendary Lords, and the thing with Legendary Lords is most likely we're not going to see the bulk of them across all the factions because of the timeline, and so particularly with those more short-lived factions like the human factions, elves and undead is a little bit different, but certainly we can expect not to see a large proportion of those legendary lords with new characters being introduced into the game. But we're doing it for completion, and let's take a look at the legendary lords for Bretonnia that were in the 6th edition army book. And first up is the king himself, Bretonnian king Lewin Leoncoeur. You can see his model on the right hand side there, actually a pretty nice, dynamic and cool looking miniature. So who was he? Lewin Leoncoeur is the greatest leader of the Bretonnians since Gilles the Uniter. He's a mighty warrior king and the pinnacle of knightly perfection and honour and strategy, and he has never known defeat. His coronation was in 2500, and he utterly crushed a massive orc invasion in 2508. The magical power of the Grail flows through his veins, and legend has it that when he is cut, light streams out from the wound until it is healed. He has been on the throne now for 20 years and appears to be in the prime of his life still, though it is whispered he is close to his 90th year. Well, that certainly speaks for his power. He is currently focused on ridding Mousillon of its vampiric taint, so that's where he is currently looking at. Well, but that's just a brief background of who he is, but how does he play? Well, stats-wise, as you'd expect, high weapon skill, initiative, attacks and leadership. Low strength and toughness, though, and actually low wounds for a legendary lord of his stature. Equipment-wise, he has the lance and he has heavy armour. He comes with the magical weapon of the Sword of Couronne. That's +1 strength, and the enemy takes a leadership test, which, if failed, they can't attack and they are hit automatically. He carries the Lion's Shield. This is a normal shield, but he gets magic resistance equal to the number of dice used to cast the spell, so that can be pretty good. Bound spells have a magic resistance of 1. He also has the Crown of Bretonnia. Units within 18 inches can use his leadership, and any unit in line of sight of him is immune to panic. He comes mounted upon his hippogriff, Bequi. I don't know how you pronounce that, but that's how I'm going to pronounce it. Who has large target, so can't hide behind cover, but also causes terror, as you might expect. But in terms of special rules, he has a few. So he comes with the Grail Vow, as you might expect. So he's immune to psychology. And he always starts with the Blessing of the Lady. And all his attacks are magical. Pretty good if you're fighting ethereal targets and so on. He has the Puissant Virtue, which is reroll hits and wounds in a challenge. And he also has the Virtue of Purity, which is a 5+ ward save as standard. Kind of doubles up there with the Blessing of the Lady. Blessing of the Lady gives you a 6+ ward save and a 5+ against strength 5 and above, and then he has a standard 5+ ward save, so kind of an interesting one there. Beloved Son of Bretonnia, if he dies, all units on the board take a panic test. And then those that pass and remain on the board for the rest of the battle are stubborn. The Army of the King, Grail Knights, are no longer restricted to one unit. So this is one of the ways that you can get extra Grail Knights, though Men-at-Arms and Bowmen become special, which means that only leaves you 2 core units. As I said, the Bretonnian roster is very bare bones. That would mean that the only core you have to meet the core tax of 50%, 25%, is through Knights of the Realm and Knights Errant. So if you are going to be fielding King Lew and Leon core, you're pretty much fielding an all-mounted army. He's also the Lady's Champion, always has Blessing of the Lady and has Regeneration. However, if he flees or refuses a challenge, he will lose the Blessing and take a wound with no saves allowed. However, he does keep the Regeneration. So, a lot of rules there. Seems like he could do quite well in melee combat. However, he's 728 points. So, in reality, he was never seen outside narrative battles. And while being overall quite strong in melee, it was rare and hard to achieve making his points cost back. Which is a shame because he's a very cool and great theme miniature and lore character. But just far too expensive for what he does. Certainly back in 6th edition that may have been a bit different, but in 8th edition, with the meta being these large big blocks of infantry, main characters hiding in these blocks of infantry of which he can't join a unit, makes it a real problem. So unfortunately, Lew and Leonka not a regular on the tabletop, despite how cool he looks and how cool his miniature is. Moving on, however, we have the Fey Enchantress herself. So, a figure of awe and inspiration who is the personal representative of the Lady of the Lake. Even kings of Bretonnia must bow to her counsel, and Grail Knights are sworn to respond to any call or decree of the Fey Enchantress, as seen when she ordered King Balaam to be removed and replaced. If the king has no heir, she alone has the power to select a replacement, and there have been many Fey Enchantresses, with the current one named Morgiana, which suggests there will be a Fey Enchantress during Warhammer The Old World, despite its different timeline to Warhammer Fantasy Battle, though she's likely to have a different name. Is Lady Elise Ducard the new Fey Enchantress? We don't know, but she is riding a unicorn, and if you see on the right hand side of the picture here, the Fey Enchantress model is also riding a unicorn, which was specific to her. She will appear to questing knights on the final stage of their journey, and she will sometimes ride alongside armies in defence of Bretonnia, lending her powers to the protection of those fighting in the name of the lady. So that's a brief canter through who she is. How does she play? Well, she's got low stats for a legendary lord, but pretty average for a caster. Equipment-wise, she comes with the Chalice of Potions. So during the magic phase, you roll a d6, and that automatically casts a spell which corresponds to that d6 number from the Law of Heavens. So you just basically roll the d6, you go down the list, you roll a 3, you pick the spell that corresponds to the number 3, and that's cast as a bound spell. If you roll a 6, however, you cast a Comet of Casandora. That's a pretty potent spell, which cannot be dispelled. However, after you do that, the chalice can then not be used for the rest of the battle. So a bit of downside there. She does come with a Girdle of Gold. That's a 4+ ward save, which is pretty nice. And she does have a power familiar, which is a toad. And that toad gives her +1 power and +1 dispel dice. She comes mounted upon Silveron, who is a unicorn. Unicorn gives her +2 strength on the charge, 5+ ward save, and a magic resistance of 2. All attacks are magical, and he causes fear. However, it would be unusual that you'd be wanting to charge her in to combat, even with that 4+ ward save. Her thing is casting. She is a level 4 wizard. She can use any of the 8 laws of magic. However, she does get +2 to the Law of Life. Law of Life is not a bad law to choose. A Dwellers Below, known as a pretty nasty spell. So given the fact she gets Law of Heavens through her chalice, having the Law of Life would be the usual way she was seen. Special rules: she has a supreme aura of the lady this time, which is magic resistance of 3. So she's reasonably durable, but it's still on that whole 50/50 4+ save. She does cause fear, however, to Skaven, orcs, goblins, and beasts of chaos. She has Favour of the Fae, so one champion model is chosen at the beginning of the game, and he gets +1 to hit for the entire battle. But if he loses the blessing through fleeing or refusing a challenge, then both the Fae and him take a wound that cannot be saved. Blessing of the Lady, she does start with it as you'd expect and always has the 5+ ward save. It doesn't have to be a strength 5 attack. And she can be accompanied by Grail Guardians. Now, Grail Guardian, essentially, this is another way of getting Grail Knights. She can have up to 8 Grail Guardians. Grail Guardians in Total Warhammer were a separate unit, so it remains to be seen how this will be treated in Warhammer The Old World. Are we going to see another unit known as Grail Guardians? I hope we do. They do need extra special units, certainly in the rare category, so I'd like to see it. It remains to be seen if that will be the case, but in the 6th edition, essentially they became her bodyguard. She also has Spiteful Glance, which is in base contact, take an initiative test, or take 1 wound. So again, as with most legendary lords in Warhammer Fantasy Battle, particularly in the 8th edition realm and even 6th edition that we see here, the points cost is very high. But she's more usable than Lewin. She's 545 points. Lewin is over 200 or 200 points more, and does offer significant advantages over a prophetess, and a means to get more Grail Knights. And that's probably where the most value comes, is if you really want to tech more into those Grail Knights. But for me personally, I rarely used her, and the main reason for that is I really like the Green Knight, as we'll come on to, and so I often prefer taking a generic Lord, a generic Prophetess combined with the Green Knight, as opposed to taking the Fey Enchantress. But she's not unusable, but 500 points for anything. Can she get that back? Maybe with a good Dwellers Below and some other things, the value is there, with her Chalice and so on, so that it is possible, and the ward save does help. It certainly you'd give you pause to stop and think, do I want her in the army or not? Whereas Lou and Leon Kerr at 728 points, you go, that's just too many points to be usable. So that's the Fey Enchantress, and we come on to the last of our legendary lords, and my personal favourite, and one of my favourite not only miniatures in Bretonnian roster, but one of my favourite miniatures that was made during Warhammer Fantasy Battle era, the Green Knight. So he is the most popular figure in Bretonnian folklore, with many stories and poems about him. He challenges questing knights to duels so they might prove their worth for the Grail. He's the sacred protector of Bretonnia, and his spirit essence is linked to the land and the Lady of the Lake. Appearing to defend sacred sites, he has killed thousands of beastmen and is known to them as Soul Killer. Weapons have little effect, with arrows and blades passing right through him, and even the most grievous of wounds have little or no effect. Some say he is the spirit of Bretonnia given form. Others say it is the spirit of Gilles Le Breton himself, continuing to protect Bretonnia in death as he did in life. And you only have to look on the right hand side there at that picture. Absolutely fantastic looking miniature, absolutely amazing. And this is the only one of the legendary lords that I could see being in the old world, because he has always been around. He appears, he's throughout the timeline, so he's not tied to the modern timeline. So the Green Knight, one, he's critical to the Bretonnian lore, but he does fit within the timeline. He has a great miniature. Are we going to see this old miniature re-released? I think it's absolutely possible. Are we going to see a glow up of this miniature? It's possible, though I don't think we will. I think Games Workshop would be well within their rights to just re-release this classic miniature I do believe, although I have a metal version, I do believe he did come in resin finecast at the end. So it remains to be seen what material he would be in. But I think of all the legendary lords, we may well see this guy reappear, and we should see this guy reappear. So in terms of how he played, though, he's got high movement, weapon skill, initiative, attacks, leadership, low ballistic skill, not a problem, but not the most wounds. Equipment-wise, heavy armor, shield, and barding, and only one magic item, which is the Dolorous Blade. But that's a pretty good magic item for him, because he can either choose to have plus d6 attacks if you're going after weak infantry, skeletons, clan rats, that sort of thing, or you can go for that extra plus 2 strength, which applies to all rounds of combat, so not just on the charge, so he can deal with those tougher monsters or characters. He's mounted on the Shadow Steed, and he has a movement of 8 inches and is not slowed by barding. Special rules, he's got quite a few, and in fact he's probably got the most special rules of any unit on the roster. He has spirit form, so he can never be broken, but if he does lose combat, he loses a wound, so he crumbles a bit like the undead. Immune to psychology and causing terror, he is also ethereal, which no movement penalties. He can only be harmed by magical weapons and demons, but he cannot join any units. He always has the Blessing of the Lady, which is a 5+ ward save on top of his heavy armor, shield, and barding. He is the guardian of the sacred sites. He does not deploy at the beginning of the battle. You have to roll a 3+ to awaken him in your movement phase, at which point he will appear anywhere on the board near a natural feature, and can be removed from the board in subsequent rounds and then placed anywhere near a natural terrain feature. So essentially he can teleport around the board. That's very useful. He comes with the aura of the Fae. If slain, he can be reawoken each time, so but with a -1 penalty. So the first time you awake him, it's a 3+. If he dies, you can try again at a 4+. If he dies a second time, you can try again at a 5+. And the enemy player gets no victory points if the Green Knight is on the table. And what I mean by that is no victory points for killing him. So if you kill the Green Knight and then he reawakens on the 4+, or even reawakens a second time on the 5+, that player gets no victory points for killing him the first or second time. So, not only is the Green Knight one of the coolest looking models, as I've already said, and that's my personal opinion, he is also a steal. He's 275 points. He's hugely mobile. He's very survivable. He's got the ward save. He's got the heavy armor, shield, and barding. He can't be harmed by normal weapons, only magical weapons. So very survivable. And he packs a pretty reasonable punch, particularly given that he can choose how he attacks with that magical weapon. If he works with other units, he can very much turn the course of combat. So, if you've got a Knights of the Realm unit that's in combat with somebody and they go into that second round, you bring the Green Knight in, he can very much help turn the course of that combat. And his ability to teleport, he can be used where he's most needed, right? So you can move him around the board one side to the other, help out in one combat, one turn, and then in the next turn helping out in another. And while you can fail to awaken him, you could be unlucky. You never roll that 3+ to awaken him. You'd be very unlucky if that happened over the course of 5 battle rounds. And I think his capability that he brings to the table is more than worth that risk. So, the Green Knight, my favourite miniature in the Bretonnian roster, one of my favourite miniatures ever, pretty much always featured in my army because, one, not only does he look absolutely amazing, he also does absolutely he's a value for points. It's 275 points. He's absolute value for that points cost. So fantastic there. And that brings us to the end of the Bretonnian roster. There are no more legendary lords in the 6th edition book, and there are no more legendary heroes. So there'll be some that you'll have heard about from previous that even had miniatures. Jules le Jongleur, and also what was his name? Bertrand the Brigand, who was kind of based on Robin Hood, who had a whole bunch of miniatures tied to him that looked like Little John and Friar Tuck from Robin Hood. But Bertrand the Brigand, both of those out of the book, and which is a real shame because these are characterful models that were removed. So, but those again, from a timeline perspective, certainly don't expect to see them in the old world. The only legendary one that absolutely could and should be in Warhammer The Old World is the Green Knight. So there you go. That's the end of the Bretonnian series, ladies and gentlemen. It's taken a while to release it. Like I say, real life has been in the way and continues to be in the way up to the end of the year. We've got lots going on. I'm moving house, getting married, and all sorts of stuff. But I'm still trying to get this content out for you guys. I'm still trying to get the news content out when it drops, when I can. And there are still more series to come before the end of the year, as we know that Warhammer The Old World will now release in early 2024. The next series is going to be one of my favourite factions, the Vampire Counts, which I think is also quite nice, following on from the Bretonians when we've been talking about Mousillon. But Vampire Counts will be next. There are others to come after that. We've still got Chaos and Orcs and Goblins and others to do, which we will come on to. But Vampire Counts will be next. I hope you've enjoyed this series. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, though, give it a thumbs down. Let me know why in the comments down below. And if you want to keep seeing this content, please hit that subscribe button. It's absolutely critical for me. It's so important, and it's totally free for you to do it. So, thanks for that in advance. Also, for this series, we've been trying with the camera. Our feedback suggested that on YouTube, specific content, i.e. non-live streamed, pre-recorded content, the camera was distracting and took too much of the screen. So let me know, do you want the camera on? Do you want it off? How do you prefer it? I want to improve my content. I can only do that with your feedback. With it off this time, certainly you could see the larger pictures on this type of content. So please let me know for the future. You've been watching The Ghost Hour. Tune back in for some more content, whether it's video games, first plays, playthroughs, live streams, or indeed some more Warhammer The Old World Vampire Counts, though it will be about 3 weeks before we get the Vampire Count series.